He walked into class carrying nothing but an old violin and a quiet hope. But instead of support, his teachers turned the room into a stage of humiliation. Whispers, laughter, and doubt cutting deeper than any words should. No one believed he could play. No one thought his music mattered. Yet, in just moments, everything would change. Because when the bow touched the strings, the sound that followed wasn't just music, it was truth. And the question remains, how could a single song silence an entire room of hate? It was supposed to be just another day at school. The chatter of students filled the hallway, books slammed shut, and the faint sound of sneakers echoed against the polished floors. Among them walked a boy, quiet, careful, holding tightly onto the violin case that never left his side. To most, he was invisible, just another face in the crowd. But for him, that instrument wasn't just wood and strings. It was his voice, his story, his way of breathing in a world that rarely gave him space. His mornings always began the same. He would practice before school, hands trembling not from weakness, but from the weight of knowing that every note had to be perfect. Music was more than passion. It was the only place he felt free. Yet the walls of his classroom weren't as kind. Teachers who should have guided him instead mocked his ambitions, dismissing his talent before hearing a single sound. They questioned his place, his ability, and even his worth. Still, he carried on. Each step through the corridor felt heavier, each glance from his teachers a reminder of the storm waiting inside. He wasn't just walking into a lesson that day, he was walking into a test of dignity. What none of them knew was that before the day ended, the same boy they tried to humiliate would leave the entire room silent, with nothing but the music in his hands. The classroom buzzed with restless energy. Students whispered in the back, tapping pencils against desks, waiting for something, anything, to distract them from another ordinary lesson. But when the teacher's eyes settled on him, the atmosphere shifted. With a smirk, she motioned toward the violin case. "Why don't you show us what you've got?" Her voice carried just enough sarcasm for the class to catch on. Laughter rippled across the room. Some leaned back in their chairs, already expecting a disaster. Others whispered cruel jokes, not even bothering to hide their amusement. His hands tightened around the handle of the case. This wasn't an invitation. It was a trap. Every instinct told him to shrink back, to keep the violin safe inside, to avoid becoming the target. But silence would only make the ridicule sharper. Slowly, he placed the case on the desk, unlatched it, and lifted the instrument with the same care others might hold a fragile memory. The mocking grew louder. A student mimicked playing, scratching at the air with invisible strings. Another whispered, "Bet he can't even hold it right." Even the teacher folded her arms, eyebrows raised, as though waiting for proof of failure. He took his place at the front, heart pounding, the weight of 100 eyes pressing against him. The bow shook in his hand, not from lack of skill, but from the awareness that one mistake could confirm every cruel word spoken about him. The first note quivered, barely escaping the strings. Laughter erupted again. Someone coughed dramatically, and another student tapped their desk in mock applause. His chest tightened, vision blurring with heat rising in his eyes. For a second, he thought of stopping, of letting them win, of sitting back down and sparing himself more humiliation. But then, he remembered the hours alone in his room, the countless mornings spent practicing until his fingers ached, the melodies that carried him through nights when words weren't enough. He remembered why he played, not for them, but for himself. His bow touched the strings again, this time steady, deliberate. The sound grew fuller, richer. The noise of the classroom dimmed, the mocking whispers fading as a new rhythm filled the space. It wasn't just music, it was defiance. Every note pushed back against the sneers, every melody challenged the silence they had forced upon him. The room stilled. Students who had laughed now leaned forward. The teacher, arms still crossed, shifted uneasily. Something was happening that none of them had expected. And in that moment, standing in front of those who doubted him, he realized this wasn't just about a performance. This was about proving that their cruelty could not drown out his voice. The bow moved faster now, every stroke carving through the heavy silence that had replaced the laughter. His music filled every corner of the room, deep, raw, unrelenting. It wasn't the polished sound of a concert hall. It was something more powerful. It was years of struggle poured into melody, the echo of every insult, every doubt, every door that had been slammed in his face. Students who had been ready to mock sat frozen, their smirks erased. Some blinked rapidly, as if fighting back emotions they didn't expect to feel. The notes swelled, rising higher, trembling with urgency, until it seemed as though the violin itself was speaking, crying, shouting, refusing to be silenced. The teacher's posture changed. Her crossed arms loosened, her gaze fixed on the boy she had tried to humiliate. There was no denying it now. The sound that filled the classroom was undeniable truth. Proof that talent, passion, and resilience could not be hidden behind prejudice. He closed his eyes as he played, no longer seeing the faces around him. For those few minutes, the classroom was gone. There was only him, his violin, and the freedom of being heard at last. The music soared, then softened like a heartbeat slowing after a sprint, before rising one final time into a note so piercing, so pure that it seemed to hang in the air forever. When the bow finally stilled, the silence that followed was deafening. No laughter, no whispers. Only the echo of what they had just witnessed lingering in the air. For a boy who had entered the room as a target of ridicule, this was his moment of victory. He had turned their cruelty into an audience, one that had no choice but to listen. And in that silence, every person knew. Something inside them had shifted. The room remained still, every student frozen in place, unsure how to react. Seconds earlier, laughter had filled the air. Now, only the echo of music lingered, pressing against their silence like a mirror they couldn't turn away from. For the first time, they had truly listened, not just to notes, but to the heart behind them. The teacher, who had led the ridicule, shifted uneasily. Her authority, once unquestioned, seemed fragile in the face of a boy who needed no words to prove his worth. She looked away, but the damage was done. She had wanted to humiliate him. Instead, she had exposed her own prejudice to everyone watching. The boy lowered his violin slowly, his chest rising and falling with the effort of carrying his soul through music. He didn't smile, didn't gloat. He simply stood there, calm, as though the silence itself was the answer he had been waiting for. In that stillness, something remarkable happened. Respect replaced ridicule, curiosity replaced mockery, and for a fleeting moment, every barrier between them dissolved. When he walked back to his seat, the room remained hushed, the weight of what they had heard impossible to shake. They would remember it, not just as music, but as a moment when truth cut through cruelty. He may have entered that classroom as the boy no one believed in, but he left as something far greater, proof that dignity cannot be broken, that talent cannot be silenced, and that sometimes the most powerful voices are the ones carried on strings. And the question that hung in the air long after the final note was simple, yet haunting. How many more voices have we ignored, just because we refuse to see beyond our own prejudice?